Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to just take a few minutes and talk about some of the lessons that I and my colleagues have learned on a couple of different kinds of projects where we've been teaching with data, and certainly as it's continued on in my own classroom. And so talking about the kinds of things that probably many of you have faced or will face when you're doing these kinds of activities with your students. And so one of the activities that the sort of uh, findings come out of is the Teaching with Big Data Working Group. And I think you saw an image of that. That was that Teresa Murat and ESA were instrumental in getting us together along with Neon Inc. and the National Center for Ecological Assessment and Synthesis, NCEAS. And that was a project in which we developed activities, learning activities, and tested those among our various classrooms. And so we have a whole set of them that actually are, most of them are now available on TIE, and one of them is an activity that some of you may be trying out as well. And so we have some experience with that, but there's also a second project which I've been involved with, also from NCEAS, called the Toads and Roads Network. And I should say for both of these working groups, I wasn't the lead, I was just one of the participants on them. This one, the first one we were on, had been more involved in developing activities. This one, we developed some learning activities with the goal of producing some science. So it was a distributed seminar in which students worked with faculty analyzing data, in this case the National Amphibian Monitoring Program data, to look at landscape predictors of frog communities. So the idea of taking citizen science data and having data in the classroom and having students process that data, analyze it, and come up with some conclusions. And we actually had a paper published recently, and we have another one right now that's in review. So in both of these projects, we had a lot of assessment, and I'm not going to go through that assessment right now, but only to let you know that that did occur. And a lot of it was focused on looking at what students learned, what they thought about the activities, what they found were the positives and the negatives. And what we can show, I think, in both projects is that students learned content knowledge, so some of the content goals that we had. They also found that these kinds of activities of engaging with data and looking at real data and trying to make some inferences from it was an effective learning tool, but it was complicated. They found it difficult and a lot of work, and students didn't always find it fun, except for the strongest students were always very engaged. And one of the things that I think in both activities, or both of these workshops or working groups interesting, is we really tried to find out what students thought. And that's what I want to communicate today, is what the students told us about the experiences, and what we could see as well were those challenges. And so we actually brought focal groups of students in both programs out to Santa Barbara to talk about the experience and sort of modulate in a moderated format. And what came across in both of these programs is that students found that these kinds of activities where they're taking data, real data, and trying to test some ideas by processing that data, by analyzing it, by confronting the data in hypothesis, they found it very frustrating, but they got a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment at the end. So once they completed it, they could see the value of it. But, and I can say this from my own experience, it required a lot of reassuring students that we were going somewhere with the activities. There was a lot of frustrations in terms of learning what to do and becoming proficient at it. Students felt like they learned a lot. They were more engaged with the idea of doing research. they were inclined to see data from other places as more credible. And what I mean by that is that as we went around in the projects in my own courses, but this was also shared by other faculty as well, students got to understand that these data that came from somewhere else, both how they were produced, but also kind of understand all of the things that underlie how data is generated, or at least some of those things. And I'll talk again in a moment about what that meant. But at some point, students made the conceptual leap that they weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, but actually had science. It had a lot of science behind it, a lot of thought, and a lot of care had occurred in producing those data. So the kinds of modules that we used, the activities they found worthwhile, but they also warned, and frequently what students would say to us is that you have to be careful in terms of how much guidance. It's easy to give too little guidance, and I'll talk about that again in a moment, or too much. So students have had plenty of activities, or at least my students, but other students from other universities that were involved in this as well, reported that they had lots of activities where they had canned data, and they already knew before they even opened the data sheet or looked at the data what the answer would be, and sure enough, the answer would pop out and they were done. So they weren't very engaged, didn't find that very interesting. But at the same time, just giving a spreadsheet full of data and saying, answer this question with it was too big a problem, too big a thing for certainly my students, but other students as well, to get around, that they needed to be scaffolded into using data effectively to answer questions. And so, we came together with some kind of final thoughts from both of these meetings, and also some challenges that we identified. And I'd say the first is that from the point of view of designing effective activities that work in a classroom, it was a heck of a lot more work and more complicated than any of us had imagined. So some of you, I no doubt, have done this, but if you haven't, it's worthwhile, but it's a lot of work to get something that can be transferred into something that students can do effectively and to meet the objectives that you set out for it. We all found that students need more guidance than anticipated. My students, with a computer in front of them, they can do amazing things that I can't do. But it turns out that in a lot of the things that are simple things in terms of looking at data and just sorting through data, looking for outliers, graphing data, and so forth, students really have trouble with it, and moreover, they, at least at the undergraduate level, my students, and I think this was true of other participants as well, don't know how to go about figuring out or solving those kinds of problems that we take for granted. And so we found that students need a lot more in terms of documents and in terms of scaffolding to get up to a level that they can proficiently analyze data to answer questions. We also, I think, universally found it took a lot more time than we anticipated. That things that we could do quickly, students take a lot longer to do. And so having a realistic view of how long things will take is really important, and how long students will pay attention. We did find significant learning gains in content and in process skills, and it improved sort of the conceptual and practical skills that were missing from many of our curricula as well. And so what we say is doing these kinds of activities can both improve a typical course, but also add things that may not be there otherwise. They reinforced those and kept the interest and engaged students as well as us instructors. And I think in terms of best practices, we found that, finding data sets that help students really deal with or confront an important ecological or evolutionary issue that really requires inquiry can really engage students. So ones where students really feel that the data, that they're answering a novel question, that the answer isn't just embedded in the data that somebody already knows the answer, but they're actually having a sense of discovery is really important. But to do that effectively, we all found that creating data templates and technical help documents is really important. That students need to have a lot of things that they can refer to, because there's often a sense of frustration for students just on things that we might take for granted, like how to sort some data, or what to do with outliers, or what to do to find out what to do with missing data, and so forth. One of the things that students don't look at, and it's really important for them to understand, we found, is looking at the metadata, the data behind the data, on what the data they have are. So what are the attributes of the data sets and the particular data that are in those. That understanding that metadata helps the students have confidence that the data are reliable and valid. We had students who sometimes were concerned about using data they were provided because they were concerned about the provenance or how reliable it is, and they often understanding what metadata is and how to look at that metadata and how to use that to understand the data that they have helps them to understand, even if they didn't collect it, they didn't do the experiment or didn't do the field study themselves, that they can be confident that that data is something they can use to answer a question. Scaffolding proved to be very important, and that is, instead of providing an exercise and having the students go from the beginning to the end and seeing the outcome, moving it up in step by step. And I found that actually working over several weeks with weekly steps and check-ins was much more effective, because students tended to hit roadblocks, and different students hit roadblocks at different points, and being able to address that was important. I also found that students working in teams was important, because they could complement each other, but still teams would hit roadblocks, and moving up with those roadblocks was important. And so that requires a lot of careful monitoring of students' progress. So I found that it's important to have a lot of different ways that students and teams can provide feedback, both in terms of if they're doing team dynamics, but as individuals and teams, how far they've gotten along. It's very much a sort of a modeling project management and how to do effective project management. An important sort of overlying theme in these kinds of activities I found, and I think other colleagues doing these have found, is that it's really important to have a discussion about what public data sharing is about, how to evaluate data quality, and the kinds of obligations that go into providing and using data. Students have a lot of conceptions and misconceptions about this, about whether it's fair to use data that others have generated, whether it's valid or reliable to use data that others have generated, why people would make data public. And I think helping them understand that will help them to be help both in terms of how engaged and motivated they are to do an activity, but also the bigger issue of understanding the importance of data and public sharing of data. So Teresa asked me to come up with, I think, like sort of the 5 most critical findings, and I think things that are most important are, first of all, helping students to understand what the data are. So when starting an activity, the students really understand how the data was generated, who generated it, where and when, what each of the variables really mean, what the science is behind it. So understanding that metadata helped them to become engaged and to understand that it really is a valid inquiry to use these data to answer questions. The second, I think, critical finding is that an instructor has to anticipate and address differences in the basic methodological skills that students come in with. So my students, and I'm sure your students as well, come in with a varying range of skills, and often different students are at different places, and it's not even reasonable to say some students are advanced and some are more at a more basic level. They have different kinds of complementary skills, and being able to understand what students do know and what they need help on is really important, and part of that is having the kinds of structures or resources that students can use. They need a lot of scaffolding and progress monitoring. So there's a lot of project management, I find, at least in the activities that I do, so that students can build up their basket of skills that they need for analyzing data and making inferences from it. Providing enough time is really important. The first time you run through something, it's hard to know, but I think more is always better. That these are activities can be time-consuming, and if one tries to go too fast, students don't make the sort of conceptual progress that are usually the outcomes that are one of the outcomes that you hope for. Helping students understand spatial and temporal scale is important. I don't really have much time to talk about that, but understanding students often have a poor sense of time and space, and then how different spatial scales will give you different answers to the questions that you're asking. So helping students to understand that where it's relevant is really important. And finally, I would just say it's important to keep reminding students of the big conceptual picture. In activities where you're working with data, students can get very hung up on the methodology, the work. And tend to lose sight of why they're analyzing that data, what they're trying to answer with it. And so constantly reminding them and helping them discuss and think through why they're doing what they're doing is really important. So that's what I would say in a few minutes that I think are the most important things that I've learned. And I think that that's probably, if any of my colleagues in these programs were here speaking, would probably say something very similar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. So I think we want to open it up a little bit to the participants, and you should be able to see your dashboard where you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question, or you can also put your question in the chat box, and I'll keep a watch for that. So if there's anybody who wants to ask a question for Tom, please raise your hand.
Well, I have a question while we're waiting for the questions to come in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, Tom, I just have I guess this is a question that comes up a lot in terms of just any active learning activities, that I totally agree that you need to give a lot of time or they don't make the conceptual connections. But something I hear sometimes from colleagues is, well, how do you balance that with the material covered? And that if you're spending so much time on, I'm just giving, this is not my perspective, this is sort of the devil's advocate perspective, but if you're devoting so much time to this methodology and these are, big data sets and complex techniques, how do you balance that with kind of the content covered, and what were the students' reactions to that in terms of, did they feel like they learned a lot in terms of like biological content, et cetera?
That's a very good question, and that's a difficult, there's different models of how to deal with it. First of all, the students feel like they learn a lot, and I think you certainly cover less lecture material when you add in these kinds of activities, but in this case, I think the sense both from our assessment and sort of from talking with students, the less is more. It's things that they actually learn rather than that they sort of memorize for the exam. That they feel like they actually understand more. There's more understanding, maybe less factual content, but more understanding. And so that can be really valuable, and depending on the aims of your course, it can be the most important thing that your students come out with. There's different models to try to balance time. So, for example, what I often do is I make the actual activities are done mostly out of the classroom with check-ins in the classroom. So their homework, students meet off campus, or I should say out of the classroom, to work on the activities, and they come back in and report out or report at different steps. And I do out-of-class meetings with groups. That works well, at least at an institution like mine where students are nearby and not commuters. At a commuter college, faculty that are at commuter colleges find that model is more difficult. Some of my colleagues have add-on short courses where they just focus on doing the data activities. So they add, for example, a credit hour, which is kind of a lab, which is done just to focus on doing the activities, and so that they don't miss some of their lecture time or sacrifice, as they see it, sacrifice lecture time by doing these kinds of activities. I find that doing these, at least part of it in the classroom, is important because it breaks up from other kinds of things that students are doing. And students find these as an interesting and engaging activity to keep ways of keeping engaged that break up some of the lecture and other things. So I tend to do a short lecture, then an activity, and then something else to keep it going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have 4 questions that have been posted while you were responding to that first one. Thank you. So the first question has to do with what was the statistical background of the students in your class? Did they fully understand t-tests, ANOVAs, more advanced tests?
And Teresa, could you just say who the question's from? Sorry, Tom, to interrupt you.
Okay, it's from Elizabeth Perkin.
Okay, to be quite honest, in my class, most of the students had fairly minimal statistical background. Now, some of them had taken a typical undergraduate biology statistics course, but I can't say that they showed much mastery. Others really had none at all. So I had to help them with that as well. And so I tried to make sure that I had some materials and some introduction so that they could make inferences with the data, even though they may not have be able to do it with the level of statistical sophistication that we would expect a more advanced student to do.
Okay, great. And the next question is from Brandon Noel, who joined this group to teach a non-majors class. So do you have any advice on how to deal with the limited amount of time to spend with non-majors?
I think I've actually done or had some activities done in non-majors courses, and what I can say is, as long as you think about the time that you have available and the time that the students have available, you can adapt these kinds of activities. If they're well-designed activities, you should be able to adapt to meet your students' preparation and time availability or commitment and the time availability that you have. So what that can mean is doing only a part of it. It may mean having some of the work already done, and the students add to that their part and then do the analysis. What's most critical, I think, is having students have the opportunity to grapple with some data, right? So actually work a little bit with the data and have the opportunity to look at that data, visualization or some kind of data analysis that allow them to make some inferences, some valid inferences. And I think in a non-majors course with a focused question and a focused set of data, that's possible. At least that's been my experience.
Right. Yes, and I think the whole purpose of these networks are to kind of help each other figure that out as well. So Brandon, don't worry, we're right with you. Okay, Conchi Rodriguez has a question on, can you give a specific example of when students think they are given too much guidance? Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, I think that happens, and that's happened, I think, in my own teaching, when they're sort of given a worksheet, and they're saying, okay, here's a data sheet, graph this, and then answer this set of questions. And I mean, as an introductory exercise, that can be useful, but students find it fairly complain about the fact that they're kind of, especially if they have to do a lot of work to get the answer, for example, do some data entry or something and then go out and doing it, that they feel like they're working towards an answer they already have, or an answer that's already there. And so they find that that's just too much guidance. Does that make sense? That having things that are canned enough that they kind of go through the clicks and the kinds of level work to get to the answer, of an answer that's already embedded in the data, they find to be less worthwhile.
Okay. Let me just also interrupt to say, if people want to pose a question verbally, I can unmute you. So just let me know. Okay. And Conchi, if you had a follow-up question, feel free to let me know as well. Well, let's see. Let me go on to another question, and then we can come back to Conchi if she wants to follow up on that. So another question came from Kristen Gennett. Does anyone have any experience implementing these types of activities in online courses?
I do not.
Okay. I don't know. QUBES folks, do you want to answer that?
Well, this is Sam Donovan. I'll just say that one of the strategies that QUBES is employing is trying to build on the existing resources and think about how they play out in these diverse educational settings. So taking an existing module, thinking about the ways that it would need to be modified or expanded in certain areas, trimmed in other areas to be successful in an online environment is exactly the kind of teaching scholarship that we're promoting, right? The message that we sold to NSF was people have made huge investments in the initial developments of these resources, and instead of treating them as standalone finished products, we should be building off of them or extending them for use in different classroom settings and different audiences. So I think that's a really valuable place to do work, and I'm sure there are many people in the group who are interested in that.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Anita Baines has another question related to large classes. Any suggestions for implementing this kind of project, needing lots of instructor feedback for groups for a large class, especially where there are no TAs available?
Well, what I've done, I've done it in medium-sized classes, not really large ones, but ones where there's enough students and it's without a TA that it's a bit of a challenge. And so there, I think first of all, doing it as small as team projects, so breaking the class up into teams is important. I try to identify before I start them students who I think are going to be good leaders, maybe they're more senior level or something, and make sure that those are scattered around in the groups so that there's somebody in the group that's able to has the background and skills to be able to provide some leadership or some project management. But it still then takes a lot of work from the instructor, at least as I've done it. Sam, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so I teach a pretty large introductory course, about 300 students, and while I don't do a lot of multi-week activities, we do multiple data analysis activities where students actually have to ask their own question of an existing data set. And I think you're right on with some of your suggestions there. The key is, in my sort of approach, is to make it a team activity, right? Students have a lot of knowledge, and they just need to stop waiting for the instructor to answer their question, right? They need to talk to other students. They need to share what they found as an intermediate result. The way that I manage those kinds of situations, they're all working from the same data set, and so they're familiar with the structure of the data and the kinds of questions that can be addressed. And so I build in explicit prompts for them to check with another group, right? What are they doing? Are they asking the same kind of question? Did they generate a graph that you'd like to know how to generate? You know, have them teach you. And so building in explicit prompts to have the students talk to each other alleviates some of that burden for the instructor.
So I wonder if that response might cover Dawn Lemke's question, which is, what is the best level to start this learning process? How do you think freshmen would find it? So she says, I have a freshman computer application class for students in the College of Agriculture, Life, and Natural Science, and I'd like to try some of this with them. And currently we spend about a month learning Excel applications.
Well, I can say in my experience, in my courses, I have a mixture of sophomores, freshmen, and actually even some that are kind of seniors in high school who are doing their senior year at Clarkson. So I think at that early level where they've still not even had statistics yet, many of them haven't, it's highly valuable for them. It's often their first experience in dealing with a lot of data, so they've almost universally have had science labs where they generate a small amount of data and make a graph with a few data points, but they've rarely had the experience of working with the kinds of data sets that we routinely do, that are data-rich data sets. And I think they do fine. In fact, it's very engaging for them. It feels more like, in some sense, having real scientific data than the kinds of data that they self-generate in their labs. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that, Sam?
Yeah, actually, I think the scenario poses an interesting opportunity if you're spending a significant amount of time learning different techniques and procedures in Excel. If you did that in a real data context, it provides a rich sort of setting for students to apply those ideas, the technical ideas, at the same time as they're learning some biology.
Okay, great.
You know,
oh, go ahead.
Can I add something, Teresa?
Sure.
One of the things when you're thinking about different models of doing these, and particularly in larger classes, but also in smaller, is one of the things that we've done is first of all, have small groups, but also then have, for example, redundant groups where two groups are working with the same data, but in parallel, so that they can actually check their data. So do something that we real scientists do, is check each other's work. And so that both motivates students to do a good job, but it also catches any problems or mistakes or misconceptions in the data that otherwise it's hard for the faculty member to catch. And then we build kind of a pyramid program where different groups put together little parts of the data analysis, and then we bring those together, and then we build that up until basically the whole class collectively has solved the problem by each part of the class doing a part of it. And that can work well. It requires some organization and project management, but that's a way that you can have a lot of students working on it, but ultimately coming up with one kind of product or one kind of outcome that everybody feels like they've contributed to.
Okay, great. Conchi, I'm going to put you on the call so you can raise your follow-up question. Let me unmute you. Okay, go ahead, Conchi.
Hi, this is Conchi. I was just asking you about one student think that they are given too much guidance, and I think what you were telling me was that they don't want easy problems; they just want challenging problems. Is that what you mean?
Yes, yes, I think that's what I mean. They want challenging problems. They want to be able to solve them, so you have to provide a lot of scaffolding and sort of keeping track of where they're at so that they don't become frustrated or blocked.
Mm-hmm.
But they
Okay.
prefer, I think, being able to have a challenge so they feel like when they've solved it or when they're finished that they've actually really done something that's an achievement.
Okay, so that they feel that they work and they have a result.
Yes. And sometimes that requires helping them to understand that once they get through it, if it doesn't provide the result that they expected,
Uh-huh.
but that's okay too. That if they've
Okay.
done a good job, that might be the answer. That because we
Okay.
have a hypothesis that we're testing, and we're using data to test that hypothesis. Sometimes what the data show is that there's no evidence with that data that hypothesis
Mm-hmm.
is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom,
Great.
that sounds an awful lot like science.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, great. So I think we have time for just one last question, and actually there are in fact two questions but related, I think. So this is from Laura Beaton. I've been considering reserving a computer lab for 1 hour a week. Does that seem reasonable, or would you recommend instead spending 1 or 2 weeks working intensively on the modules? And then from Denny, what environment is better to work these activities, a lecture class or within a lab? So again, they're kind of related question. Yeah.
I would say the answer to the first question is I prefer to do it over several weeks, a little bit over several weeks. That way it keeps students not feeling overwhelmed. It allows you to have more time to catch if there is a block or if the students are having a problem to be able to address that. I think students find it less overwhelming. They have more time to stop and reflect or relearn if they make a mistake, if it's done over several weeks and more intensively in 1 week. At least that's my preference. As for the second, for Denny's question, from my point of view, I've done it both in labs and as part of a lecture course, and I think both are reasonable approaches. I like doing it usually in a lecture course because that helps me to provide a way to do some real science in a lecture course, whereas my lab course is more related to doing field work or wet lab kinds of laboratories. But I think other people do kind of eco-informatic labs or do these kinds of data labs, and I think that works well too. How do you feel about that, Sam?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that I've sort of grown towards as I've done this a few times, and that's taking better advantage of the students' out-of-class work time. Right. If we can introduce the data set, the kinds of questions they're going to be asking, they can spend an hour outside of class exploring it or doing some background research. So yes. I think sometimes we underestimate, we think of students just reading the text or something, but there are some really nice opportunities to have them bring intermediate products to class or lab and then build on those, and it's much more efficient in my mind.
Yes.
The power of homework. Okay. Well, I think with that, I would like to thank Tom for, his wonderful insights. I think these are really helpful as we begin the process. And I know Sam has actually mentioned this before, but I thought I'd just reinforce his previous statements, that the idea of these networks are that all of you are going to be working in different settings. Some of you will be working with freshmen, some of you will be working with upper class, some of you will be in labs, others will be in lectures. So the point is that we want to see how these kinds of activities can be delivered in different settings, and we really want to learn from you, and give you support as you go along. But I think this is all part of the discovery of what works, for us. Sam, did you want to add to that, or correct what I said?
No, I think you captured it. Thank you. That's very good.
Okay, so Arietta, I'm going to switch the screen over to you.
Great.
Okay, and then we'll be talking about some of the oops, did I just?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Okay, great. There we go. Okay, yeah, and we'll be doing a more of a demo, right, of the CUBE site. Okay.
Yeah, so this is just going to be a 5-minute sort of run through of the group site. We have a lot of places where we can put things, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it's hard to follow, so I'm just going to run through it quickly. So here I am on the Scaling Up group. So those of you in data discovery, it'll be the same setup, different content slightly. You can see that there are these yellow announcements at the top. These were emailed to you, and anything that's emailed as an announcement will always pop up at the top here, so you can see what's going on. These are about our webinar. You can also get to the past announcements by clicking on the announcement tab there on the left. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see the mouse too? Well, anyway.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So I wanted to start out actually with this members area, because there are a lot of people in this network and a lot of different roles, and so I just wanted to make sure that these different kinds of mentors and different kinds of participants are clear. So this is the reason that we've been asking you to fill out your profiles and to make parts of them public to people logged into the site. So it's not public to the entire internet, it's just to CUBES Hub users. And most of the things that we post in this group, unless we let you know otherwise, they're just private to your group. So only the participants of your network will be able to see them, not even general members of CUBES will. So you can see these different roles in the members section. So I'm just going to use these to go through some of our mentor roles. You can see lots of you are participants. Sam Donovan, who you've just heard talking, is one of our pedagogy mentors, so he has a lot of experience in education research and implementing these kinds of things. And then, so he, along with Tom Langen, who is our content mentor, who you also heard from, will be basically jumping into the discussions on the forums, or if you have questions, they might answer your questions if you post those in the forums. They might be stopping into your small group meetings, which I'll talk about in 1 second. They're sort of the kind of overarching group mentors that will be popping in. You also might notice a lot of people that just say CUBES coordinators. Some of us you will see regularly, some of us you will see occasionally. As Teresa said, I'm the primary coordinator. I'm Arietta, the primary coordinator for Scaling Up, and then Gabby, who's another CUBES postdoc, is the primary coordinator for data discovery. So if you have technical questions or just general questions, we're the people you should bother first. And then on top of our content and pedagogy mentors, we also have another level of peer mentors. And so we have 3 per network. Here's Kristen is one of our peer mentors. Demi is another in this one that just happened to be here. The peer mentors will be leading your small group meetings. So this is one of the primary structures of the network, are these small group meetings. They'll be about every other week, and for 30 minutes. So next week or the following week, basically sometime before the first week of February, which is when these meetings will start, you'll hear from your peer mentor and from the other people in your group, and then you'll work together to set up a time. I'll point out one other section of the website related to that. This files area is where the files for your small groups are going to pop up. So just know that that's there. This is just a shared kind of Dropbox space. So there'll be folders on the left here, and one of them will belong to your group. These small groups are really intended to be kind of horizontal mentoring, right? That it gives you a bit more manageable of a group size, some people to work with, to talk to about your successes, your setbacks. It's a pretty, we've found in past networks it's worked really well to help support people in implementing these modules. I wanted to point out also related to this, the timeline. So I've updated it a little bit. Starting now, it starts when the network starts instead of with the application deadlines. This will be updated constantly, so please keep checking back. What is up here so far is just the different dates of the small group meetings, or the week of anyway, up to the Life Discovery Conference. So again, this is for scaling up, so if you're in data discovery, it will vary a little bit, but there should also be a timeline page in your group that you can check out. And the last thing that I wanted to show on this little tour is I just wanted to draw your attention to these collections. These are still sort of skeleton collections at this point, but they're just sort of visual places to hold various resources. So for example, in this one, I put in a couple papers that of Tom's that he mentioned. And so you can download the files, you can read a little bit about them. This setup is sort of modeled on Pinterest, I think. So you can actually collect these into your own. Like if I wanted to collect that, I have a ton of collections. I can put them in like favorites. If I wanted to share them with some other group I was in, I could do that. And you can also add to these. We hope that you will add to these a lot, and we'll give you more detailed instructions on how to do that later, but I just wanted to show you this area since a lot of good things will be there. And we'll be putting like PowerPoints and links to videos for the webinars in this other currently empty collection. So I think those are the main areas of the site that I wanted to cover. And I can also, or we in general, can take any sort of logistic questions that you have, but I know that it's getting to be the end of the webinar also, so we don't want to keep people. If you have to jump out now, please feel free to do so, and we'll be in touch in the next couple of weeks about scheduling your small group meetings. Teresa, did you want to add anything?
Okay, so now I'm unmuted. Okay, so yes, I do also want to add that, as I mentioned, you are all, going to be viewed as education scholars and ESA education scholars, and what that means also is that you share your experiences with others, and all of the Thai modules that you'll be using are posted on the EcoEd Digital Library site, and we would love to have you comment, to share your comments about those resources there, so that the broader community can learn from your experiences. So Arietta was just talking about the QUBES site, which is just internal, right? And that's very important. But at the same time, sometime toward the end of your of the semester of your experiences, it would be great if you would also think about commenting publicly about those resources and how to add extensions or adaptations for different settings. So that's something that I would like to just say to give you a heads up. And so at this point then, we are at the end of the webinar, but I would like to invite those who are on the Scaling Up project to stay on for just a couple more minutes so that I can tell you about the Live Discovery Conference and how to and some travel logistics. And all the others, I will let you go. And thank you so much for joining us. We are really, really excited to launch these networks, and we look forward to working with you and to all the interactions that we will have in the coming months. And thank you, Tom, for the excellent sharing. Really appreciate that. Okay, so everybody else who are not scaling up, you can leave, and I will proceed to talk about the Life Discovery Conference, and I just want to make sure that people can see my screen this time. Oh gosh. Okay, yes. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Sam, did you want to make a quick comment? Oops, sorry, I didn't see that before everybody left. Sam?
No, I'm fine. Nope,
Okay.
I'm going to leave too. Thank you very much, Teresa.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay, so for those who are coming to the on the Scaling Up, and I hope everybody is coming to the Live Discovery Conference because that's kind of one of the expectations. So March 17th is the pre-conference workshop for QUBES, right? You will have a whole day of meeting with with one another and and kind of sharing. So that's the highlight of this network for you guys, but also to stay on for the extra 2 days of the conference itself, because that's the time when you can actually, take advantage of traveling all this distance to learn about what others are doing, and we are happy to support your travel. So what I thought would be easiest to do is if you can all book your own flights to arrive Wednesday night, okay, so that you can start first thing in the morning on Thursday, and then ESA will reserve the hotel room and cover the registration for you out of that $1,000 award. So I didn't do the numbers yet, but I will let you know in an email, what that adds up to be, and then hopefully everybody will be able to book their flights with the remaining balance. For those who are maybe coming from a little further off, I will see what I can do. I mean, I did say that it's up to $1,000, but I don't expect everybody to use up all their travel allowance. So if there's any possibility of covering in full your flight, if it happens to be a fairly costly flight, we can work with you, and I'm sure we can figure it out. So not to worry about that. But if you find that your flight is really getting up there, just let me know, give me a heads up, okay, before you book. Okay, so so the other thing I want to point out is proposals for roundtable discussions are still open, and that's sort of a format where you can share whatever teaching modules or ideas at whatever stage of development they might be in, and it doesn't have to be related to the QUBES networks. It can be something else altogether if you like. So you can bring that and propose that to hold a discussion about your activity, to get feedback about your activity. So that we are accepting proposals for those through January 24th, but do hurry because the space is limited. And so just want to point out something about the registration. So please go ahead and register for the conference, okay? And the key thing is that, oh, I really shouldn't have done that. That's okay. All right, there we go. So the key thing is submitting your proposal. If you look at the red arrow, okay, you can find it on the LDC website on the sidebar. You can submit a proposal there, and then click on that to get to the registration. And then here on the screen, you see the review a registration page. So this is really at the end of the registration form. There's a couple of pages of this, and then at the end, you'll see this page. And the main thing here is it'll ask you to check your method of payment. Just select anyone, it doesn't matter, and then ignore the payment instructions, okay? You don't have to pay, so because ESA will take care of that. Okay, so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to point out. And if you have any doubts or any questions about this process, just don't hesitate to contact me, anything at all about the Live Discovery Conference, okay? So Arietta, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. I'm happy to hang around to answer any questions about the website or logistics if people have any, or you can always contact us by email.
Right. Right. Oh, so you mean you want to stay on this call right now to if people have questions?
Oh, I mean, I'm available if,
okay.
If they would rather. Sometimes with website questions, it's just nice to ask them in person. But,
okay. Cool. Okay, so then thank you everybody for participating in this call. I think it's a great way to get started. And again, this is a historical moment, I think, for us to be able to offer this kind of mentoring support and faculty support. So I hope that everybody will really benefit and really get a lot out of the process. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay. Does anybody else on the call have any questions? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Okay.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Teresa. I'm going to take off then.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, well, let me see. Hold on. There are 5 people who are still hanging on, so let's see if there's anybody.
Okay, I'll wait then.
Let's see. Because I guess they can't hear us. Okay, Josh does have a question. All right, so let me go to Josh and unmute you. Okay, Josh, go ahead. Joshua, are you still there? Joshua, are you still there? It looks like you muted yourself, Josh. Huh. For some reason, it says attendee is self-muted. Uh-oh.
I'm not sure what the participant view looks like, but there should be a square with a microphone.
Yeah, there is. And I don't know why it says it's attendee is self-muted. I wonder maybe it's the phone setting or... Yeah, okay, there you go. Joshua?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
I'm on a Mac, I'm sorry. I have a question just about transportation. I was planning on renting a car and driving myself up there. Is that something the money can cover as well?
To Live Discovery Conference?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, I guess it depends on where you're driving from. Yes, it can. Yeah.
North Carolina. It would be more affordable to rent a car and drive.
That's fine, yes. Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that can cover gas as well?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Yeah, so it'd be the cost of the rental vehicle and gas, yes. And there's free parking, so you should be set there. Yeah.
Okay, that would be good.
Cool.
And then the hotel reservations, they're taking care of that. Do you know about how much it'll be?
It's $139 a night. So I haven't done the math to add it up. Yeah.
Okay. That'll work. So 139, 3. Okay, perfect. That'll do. Thank you for answering that question.
Yeah, and I'm sure you, after all is said and done, it will be less than $1,000. So I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think so too. I just want to make sure on that.
Okay, great.
So appreciate it.
All right, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there anybody else who wants to? Doug has a question. Can you take a train? Yes, of course you can take a train. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, Doug. Okay. Anybody else wants to ask a question? Well, Doug, you're actually unmuted, so if you have any other question, you can talk.
Fine. No, I just wanted to say thanks. It seemed obvious, but I thought I should ask.
Okay. Yep, no problem. Okay, thanks. Danny, you're still there? Did you have a question? You are also self-muted, so I can't unmute you. Danny, you had a question? Danny? Okay, not sure. Just want to check your microphone. So, meaning you don't have a question? Because you are, okay, all right, great. Okay then, thank you very much. And let's see, Arietta and Gabby, I guess that's it for us. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you,
Teresa.
Teresa.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.